welcome to CSS Day. Our first speaker is Una Kravets from Google. She's a UI and DevTools DevRel lead. She's a Learn CSS lead, member of the CSS working group, member of OpenUI, writer for web.dev, host of the Design in the Browser show, co-host of the CSS podcast, author of One-Line Layouts, creator Houdini.how, designer, developer, crafter, powerful CSS hacker, and the spearhead of container queries. I introduce Una Kravets to the stage.
Thank you, Adam. Wow. What an intro. Wow, thank you. That is wild. Hi, everybody. How are you? That was the worst mumbles. Hi, everybody. How are you? OK, a little bit more energy. I like that. So I'm here to talk to you about a CSS revolution. This is me. My name is Una Kravets. Adam did a ridiculous intro, so I appreciate that. That's not me. That's my dog, Disco. That's me right here. I'm happy to be here. I'm so excited to be here. And the last time I was here was actually 7 years ago on this stage where I talked about CSS blend modes and SVG filter effects and how you could use those in your day-to-day interfaces. And in the post-talk interview, I was asked, Una, what do you want to see on the web platform? What do you really want? And I was like, you know what? I really want backdrop filter to land across browsers. Well, me, I have good news for you. It has. We're in a bit of a golden era for CSS and web UI features. We have so many new web platform capabilities that are landing in this space at a rate of pace that we haven't seen before, and with a lot of cross-browser adoption, too. So I'm here today to talk to you about the state of CSS, what's enabled that change that we're seeing, and what you can do to be a part of it. And many of you have also noticed this shift and this picking up of the pace in CSS. In 2021, Robin Rendell noticed and said that 2021 was the best year for CSS since 2015. I haven't felt this level of excitement and momentum in years. And 2021 was just the beginning of this momentum cycle. Chris Coyer said, it looks like 2022 should be a real banner year for CSS, perhaps more of a banner year than the CSS3 of 2015. And 2022 definitely was, but 2023 might even outpace 2022. And this tweet went pretty viral, and it reads, CSS 10 years ago, you may have a little bit of Flexbox. It's buggy, but it's the best we can do. Sorry. CSS now, what do you need? Clamp? Aspect ratio, container queries, has inert cascade layers? Not only is it possible, it's already shipping. So in this talk, I want to take a look at just what's shipped in the last 2.5 years since 2021 in this golden era for web UI. And I'll break this down into 3 primary goals for the web platform. The first is creating new features that fix existing problems and frustrations. The second is innovating new capabilities that aren't currently possible. And the third is improved authoring experience or developer experience. And honestly, there's a lot of overlap between these two, but let's start with fixing current problems. Who here used 56.25% for a padding before? Raise your hands. There's a few of you. Come find me after. I have limited edition stickers of this 56.25% computer club. We have stickers. So those of you who have used that padding hack before know that aspect ratio fixed this for us. We no longer have to say padding top 56.25%. We can now say aspect ratio 16:9. That was the aspect ratio that we were trying to get with that percentage. And this is one of the first Interop 2021 initiatives that landed in all 3 browsers around the same time, which is really cool to see, and it gives us this aspect ratio. And this is also very useful to create these accurate spacing models and prevent cumulative layout shift as your page renders. There's also this issue of viewport size and viewport size consistency, which is really frustrating sometimes because we want 100 VH to mean 100% of the viewport height. And for that, we have dynamic viewport units, which Bromus has helped to implement and solve and do a lot of research for. And so now we've solved this problem by providing small viewport, large viewport, and dynamic viewport units, which I've already started using and has landed stable across browsers in 2022, which is great. We also fixed transforms on the web with individual transforms. So we no longer have to set up all of our transforms in a transform function, one transform property, which doesn't work. We can now break them out into individual transforms like translate, rotate, scale. And not only is this shorter, but you can calculate animations at different rates of change, which was so tedious to do before when you wanted things to move at a different pace. And that's why I put it in this category instead of the next one, which is developer ergonomics. CSS has become a more complete, mature language that works better with the way that we build websites today. And there have been 3 key features that have landed or landing soon, which fill some important gaps in what's currently missing. The first and probably the most requested of this feature set is CSS nesting, which we're now so close to having because it was just landed in stable, well, Firefox nightly without a flag. So that happened this week, and this has consistently been one of the top feature requests in CSS survey. So I'm like, oh, we're so close. I'm so happy and so excited. And I think that Emilio is here from Mozilla, who's been building like all the CSS features. I haven't found him yet, but I saw him on the website. So shout out to you. Nesting reduces the need to write these long selector strings and lets your code work in a more ergonomic way. You can co-locate all of your modifier styles and nest them within the parent that they're modifying. And instead of separating your media queries or container query styles somewhere further down the page so that they work well with specificity that you would expect, you can actually nest them in your component too. And a thing that I recently learned is that when you nest at rules like at container, at media, at starting style, those at rules will actually be parsed by the browser at the bottom of that CSS selector block so that you still get that expected specificity where those styles would overwrite the base styles when you have that at rule applied. So I thought that was pretty cool. This is a model that makes sense with our component-driven web universe. Who here is building components now instead of pages? Right, everybody. We're building with design systems. This is a very different world than it was 10 years ago. And co-location is cool. It makes sense to make it's so much easier to parse this card component and see all of its pieces, its children's styles, its modifiers, any queries that apply style adjustment to it. But we don't always want to co-locate our styles. And in fact, we might need to separate them. It might be important in our CSS architecture. And now there's another new cross-browser supported primitive that allows us to do that and manage the cascade. Can you guess what it is? Someone shout it out. Layers. Not scope yet. So with layers, this gives authors control over the CSS cascade, which is something that we could not do before. And that means that you can now name your layers at the top of your file. You can import CSS files directly into layers. And you can even nest layers to have a cleaner architecture, like subfolders of layered styles. This is a very powerful way to control the developer side of the cascade. And importantly, is very well supported. And it's really handy when you don't have control over the output of your CSS. So if you're using, say, some kind of processing system or framework, I ran into this with Astro for my personal site, where the dev environment was different than the prod environment because they use Vite to output to prod. And I was having weird conflicts with my CSS. So when I layered my styles, it fixed all of that. Cascade layers saved the day. And you heard it next. So scope is one that is not yet quite as ready as the other two, but it is the last piece of this holy trinity for CSS architectural control. And with scope, I think that it's best to explain with an example. So let's say we have a tabs component, or like a Pokédex, if you will, a Rolodex, the Pokemon. So in this, we have these little icons and the tabs, and then this image inside of this content area. One thing that you can do with scope is set a limit for where a style applies. So here we're styling an image from the top of the tab container, or the Pokédex, to the content, where it stops. So now we don't have to reapply the style to that image. We don't have to undo the styles for image. You don't have to use like these long class names to namespace everything. You can use scope. And you might already be doing this with another solution like CSS modules, which hashes all of your styles. And I really like CSS modules. I tend to use it for almost all of my React-based projects. But it's one less dependency. Yay. This is my one less dependency face. I make this face a lot. So let's talk about new CSS features that open up new capabilities for users, or things that support a different user experience than was possible even 5 years ago. And this isn't just a golden era for CSS. It is a time that we're enabling a whole new era for responsive design capabilities. It's a time that we can rethink how we think about responsive design. Now we have more features than ever to let you build interfaces that are responsive to your users and their needs and their preferences, to the device that the application lives on and its modern features, and to the interface that the component lives within, so the page itself, being responsive to itself and its children and its parents, which is so cool. In terms of device capabilities, the web has been behind. And if you were there yesterday, you heard Adam talking about some expanded color spaces. The web is now just catching up with these device capabilities. And now stable in all modern browsers recently are these expanded color spaces. We're no longer limited to just HSL, the sRGB color space. We have P3, Lab, OKLCH, and more. And I hope that you could see this difference on the screen, because it's really apparent on my screen. But Andrei Sitnik, who created Post-CSS, here shows the difference between the P3 peak and the sRGB peak, and then in that little gradient, which, trust me, is a lot more clear here, it makes a huge difference for making these colors pop, making the brand feel vivid. And Andrei also built a tool called OKLCH.com to explore these differences, which is a really cool interactive tool that I highly recommend that you check out to see what the peaks are, and especially which color spaces have more differences. And Adam Argyle, our MC today, also built a great resource to explore expanded color spaces and gradient features. So here I'm just toggling between the HDR color and what that fallback might look like on monitors or even browsers that don't support it, but now modern browsers do. So I thought that this is pretty cool. It's a pretty fully featured tool for building gradients and exploring them. And you can also see those differences in DevTools. So DevTools show a line between where the sRGB color space ends and where, in this case, we have Lab and LCH, where those begin. We also have a new mixing function called Color Mix, which is recently stable as well. Color Mix supports the mixing of two different color values to create new values based on the channels of the colors getting mixed. And the color space in which you mix affects the results. So working in something like OKLCH, a more perceptual color space, gives you a bit of a more saturated output than something like sRGB or XYZ. And that one you can see on the screen. Nice. But you can also see this in action in Chrome DevTools. This is one of my favorite features, that little Venn diagram icon. It's such a nice little big thing where you can see the actual mixed color in between the circles and the colors that you're mixing around it. So it's like that's a really, really cool feature that was designed by Peter. And one cool thing with Color Mix is that it enables you to now preserve your brand colors, like your brand blue, and then create variations of them. So you can create things like semi-transparent variants, and the way to do that is to mix a color with transparent in the sRGB color space, like this. So this is like a 50% mix. And you can create entire theming systems this way by using these new functions in DevTools, which is awesome. But really what you want for this is relative color syntax, which has landed in Safari and will be worked on soon in Chrome. So there's just so many features, a little time. But relative color syntax makes it even easier to build color systems based on color values by letting you mix any of these values. And this reminds me a lot of SVG filter effects, where you have the different channels that you can mix in. Now we can do this in CSS. We don't need JavaScript. We don't need SVG to do this. And you can dynamically update these values so you can see how this works great for different parts of your UI and for creating native dynamic theming, which is something that I've been wanting in CSS for so long because Sass and Compass were really spoiling us. Speaking of dynamic, you like that transition? Container queries are stable this year. Woo! It's happening. Container queries are a feature that many of us have been waiting for a very long time, and these support a huge shift in the way that we think about responsive design. And tomorrow, Miriam will dive much deeper into container queries and how they work, including why we can't query the block size of elements without a predefined height, which is a big frustration, I know. But with container queries, each of these inbox items is a component that owns its responsive logic. So there is a time when, as this layout changes, all those items look at their own individually allocated spacing or inline size to reapply styles, what's being shown, the typography shifts, and what's visible. You can combine container queries with media queries to separate them into macro or global page layouts and micro layouts like the date here and the typography and the events. These are two separate layouts that don't know each other. See how the size is smaller of the screen, but that text block is bigger for that date. And now as we get bigger, it kind of shifts back to the shrunken layout where it's block and then it's inline next to each other. And this means that we can now focus on component details, like these new tags, which are these little micro UIs within the larger interface of the product page. And you can have layers of responsive styles now. You can get really granular with them, creating these micro layouts within your macro layouts, like this responsive Add to Cart button, which can go inside of a responsive card. And we can keep going with this. You can even have that button component styled completely differently based on your UI while preserving all of the responsive logic that you've built into it in your styles. This would have been so useful for the job that I had before Google, where I worked on a large React code base, and we shared these core components that had shared logic, while each property was a separate website with its own visual identity. This is like the dream back then. Now we have it, which is cool. You can preserve all the logic. And we've got layers and containers all the way down. So as this shifts in size, that icon changes, the responsive icon within a responsive card. We got containers, containers, containers. And I love this post from Machadi that breaks down the Vox Media homepage into component-level style adjustments and shows you how to build this type of UI more dynamically. This is the future of responsive components, and that future is honestly almost here. Last night at the pre-event Irgun, one of the DevTools engineers asked the audience, which was largely students, who had heard of container queries. And most of the hands went up. And that made me smile so much, because it meant that people who are learning to code now don't have to learn about table layout and floats and clearfix. You can learn things that make more sense in this component-driven environment, and you don't have to deal with all of the broken parts of the web. We have so many better tools now. So it's cool to see teachers educating about these new features, and it's cool to see students learning about them and being able to use them. So following container queries, we'll have style queries and the ability to query parent elements' style values, which today only allow you to style based on custom property values. Those are a bit limited, but it's still pretty powerful. And we recently just got Boolean queries to check for just the existence of custom property values, which means less code that you're writing. But what I'm more excited about is the future, which will support range queries. So you can apply styles based on a range of values that are semantically defined with app property. That's one that I really want cross-browser. And on top of that, state queries will come next, which let you query when something is in a specific state, like sticky. This video is from one of the Chromium engineers here, who's Runa, who's literally working on this right now, on prototyping this, and just sent this to us 2 days ago, the prototype of the state queries feature in a browser, which is so cool to see. I'm going to play that again. This is so cool. Ah! So he's at the event here, too. You can come chat with him. But this lets us query things like, is something sticky? Is something in a specific position set for anchor positioning to let us apply additional styles on it? Is something out of the view? Is something overflowing? Like, this is the next iteration of container queries. And altogether, this enables a new mental model for responsive design that supports the way that we build apps today with component-driven logical interfaces. Now that logical styling is co-located in your CSS, and you can keep your application logic separated in your JavaScript. You don't have to mix them as much anymore. And this extends to typography as well. Typography blocks can have their own responsive logic too now, with things like text wrap balance and text wrap pretty. Text wrap balance is in Chrome 1.14, but text wrap pretty is currently only available behind a flag in Canary, so you can explore that one. But essentially, with text wrap balance, is it lets the browser make these adjustments to your UI to make the text blocks look more uniform. So here you can see that there are 6 text blocks on this homepage that adjust from this, where you have like API and queries sort of standing alone on that line below the rest of the heading, to this, where they're more uniform and even fully as a block. And this is limited to 4 lines of code right now, so it's only really useful for headings. But there's also text wrap pretty, which is a little bit more subtle. This only looks for orphans and standalone words. So without text wrap pretty, it looks like this, where you have those orphans, and then it changes to this. But the rest of the text doesn't change. So it's just those two. It's more subtle than something like with all of these blocks readjusting. And I actually like text wrap pretty even more. So this is a cool one to explore. We also have has landing, and this is a huge one for responsive logical components. You can query things with has as clearly as card has image, which is why I love this API. And that supports even further component-owned logic. So when combined with container queries, that becomes incredibly powerful. Here we have just a card where we're saying card has image. And if it doesn't have an image, then we're making the title bigger. And when it's in that wider view, we're setting it to one column instead of two grid columns. So now we can see how the more we embed these things, the more options we have, the more variations we have, the more the possibilities grow. And it's sort of an exponential set of options. This is even without theming, without user preferences. It's just so cool how we can build today. Has is also useful for embedding logic, like with quantity queries, where in this example, we're setting this up so that we have a block layout for attributions. And then if you have more than 5 items, instead of showing them block, we show them inline next to each other, where we can use has nth child n plus 5, li to style the list items, and then have those display inline. And we can take that a step further by saying, OK, so if this unordered list has 5 or more children, nth child n plus 5, then style the list items, except for the last child, using not with an after pseudo element of that semicolon. So you can get really, really granular. And I recently saw this tweet from Adir Code, and he created this filtering concept with has that I thought was so cool, so I tried it out on my site, and now I have JavaScript-free filtering. And you might be wondering, well, what about browser support? So we have @support selector now, too, as of April 2021. And this is something that you can use to progressively enhance some of these features. So with @support selector, I'm saying @support selector has a, and then if this is supported in the browser, then display none all those posts, and if that item is checked, show them. So in the filter bar. And then I have a bunch of styles. If it's not supported, then I don't have that experience. I just don't show the filter bar. I don't hide the posts. And it's the current experience that you have now. So it's just like a little option, but I thought it was cool. But what we really need next, too, is @supports @media. Hopefully, we could have that at some point next year. But it's cool to see these @supports features growing as the features that we have in CSS grow. Trigonometric functions is another one that I'm really excited about because I've seen so many cool demos, and these allow for more fluid, organic interfaces. And there's a great blog post from Bramis who talks about a lot of these and has created some really cool demos, like this one using ATAN2 to check what the point is between 2 specific lines that I thought was cool. And this one that you can add items to on a circular plane that rotate at various points. And this got me thinking, oh, I love this. I want to use this in an interface. So something like a radial menu component. And the way to do that is to think about positioning on that radial plane outside of where you're triggering from. So it's like a circle that's surrounding a point. And to position things on a circle, we can use cosine and sine along with the radius of where that angle is going to be. And we know the radius because it is the distance between that center point and the outside point, which is the size of the button, since it's 2 times 2 of the radius of the button, plus some extra spacing. And so we can start trying it like this, where we get that radius, the button size, space, and then we're doing this transform where we're using the cosine of the angle times that radius at the x position, and the y position is the sine of the angle times the radius. And then we can transition them. So for all of these, I had a different color and a different delay. And this is another one that I wish that we had this idea of sibling index, so I didn't have to write all the nth children. But then it looks like this. When you click on it, all of them twirl out from the side. I'm using times -1 for the translate y, so it goes up this way. And it just is so much better than every blocky website. So to make it more useful, we can make it into a popover. And popover is I think one of the most exciting features that recently landed in Chrome and is coming to other browsers soon. So with popover, you have promotion to the top layer, so you don't have to mess around with z-index anymore. Like dismiss functionality, we're clicking outside of the popover area. We'll close the popover and return focus. For popover equals auto, there's a little chart of different types of popovers. Popover equals hint is not implemented. It's an idea that's been discussed in OpenUI, but the 2 that are currently available are auto and manual. And it also has accessible keyboard binding, so hitting escape will actually close the popover and return focus to the page. So it's one less dependency. You don't need JavaScript to detect boundaries and handle clicks and keyboard strokes and manage your popovers anymore. You can let the browser handle that for you. You don't have to be resolving the same questions. And this is so exciting because Safari just announced support for popover this week for Safari 17 at WWDC. which means that we can now have popovers in 3D Vision Pro. I'm just kidding. I hope this isn't our future. But this is a great Twitter account, Shit User Story. I don't know if you follow it. It's good. But popovers are a core experience that we see all over the web, and they're not just the intrusive sign up for my newsletter popovers. And this API makes it easier to build them and manage them in a way that is accessible by default and easier to exit out of with the light dismiss. I've seen this experience all over the web too. Like if you're on a shopping site and you have this little hover that has the quick shop or preview, you can click that and click into it. These are helpful popover experiences. Not all popovers have to be annoying ads. And making a popover is really straightforward with this API. All we have to do is set up an ID on the popover, give it the popover attribute, set the type of popover, and then set the popover target on the button that's opening the popover. So it's really just a couple of keystrokes to make this work. And something to watch out for is that this gets elevated to the top layer. So that's great. As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to manage the index, but it does have some default styles like this white background. And so for this button, I had to sort of remove that, but also fake like an invisible button, so it showed through to that back button, but you could actually click it because it was in a top layer above the rest of the page. So it's just like a little fun to mess with. That's because I had to have it anchored so that it was on top of that intro button. And Hita's talk, which is coming up next, will have a lot more detail about popovers and dialogues, their benefits, how and when to use them. So I'm stoked about that because I've read a lot of his articles and he's very, very well versed on this. And popover is great, but what we also need for that is radial menu. For that radial menu to work is anchor positioning, because we'll want to anchor that popover wherever we have that menu item. So this would be the experience that users can now have throughout their UIs. And then to do that, all we have to do is a couple more keystrokes where we give that button that's triggering that popover or that anchor an ID, and then set anchor to that ID. So it's a very declarative API. And you don't have to only use anchoring on popover elements. It could be any element on your page. So it's a really convenient feature. I love how short this text block is. And you can also set fallback positions too. So if you have your popover appearing and then it's about to exit the viewport or the place that it is within the page, if it's not a popover, then you can set fallback positions using the position fallback feature. So position fallback, you would set it up like keyframes at position fallback and then give it a name, and then you would set the position fallback to that position fallback variable name. Now what we're going to do is try to position this element, so this is positioned at the top then bottom, where we have it positioned at the bottom of that anchoring element and to the left of the anchor center, which we're then going to translate so it's centered within that element, that little question mark. If that doesn't work, if we're hitting the bounds of our viewport, then we're going to shift it to that next try statement, which is positioned, the top of that element is positioned at the bottom of the anchor. The calculation there is anchor bottom plus whatever spacer we want. So we now have all of this logic that we can embed in our popovers, in our anchors, in our elements throughout the page. And this means one less dependency. One less dependency to manage your anchor positioning. And you can get really granular with this too. You can create more nuance than just top and bottom. You could have northeast, southwest. I'm hoping that we'll have libraries that do this for you that you can copy and paste and reuse throughout your UIs. And to make all of this look fluid and beautiful, we'll need the ability to animate discrete properties. We also have a new @rule called starting style to help you do that, or at least to help you animate in. So an example of how to use that is this settings UI, where to animate in, we'll first want to have this settings popover and set the popover open state. So that is a state where we're styling when the popover is open. Then what we can do is set the starting style to transform from, we're going from the bottom to the top, and opacity 0 to opacity 1. So here we're sort of animating it up. The open state is going to be the reset, so we're setting this to just translate y in opacity 1. This is the style on the popover open. And then the exit state is the default or resting state of this UI, of this element, and that's going to be shifting up and going back to opacity 0. So an important key note for translating things like display, going from display none to a display value of, say, block here, is that in the changes that it's not happening at 0 seconds of that animation, it's flipping in the center. But you also have to include display in the transition. And this syntax might change because it is changing the ability to animate discrete properties. So that's why I don't have browser support on this. It's more experimental, but it is a feature that's coming with overlay features, with popover open that already exists for popover, and then with starting style to enable that animation. Let's go back to the past again. This is a tweet from October 2017. I'm like, it's 2017. Why can we still not style dropdowns? Good question, me. Well, that's coming too. It's called the select menu element, and it'll allow us to style all sorts of dropdowns using primitives under the hood of anchor and popover, but in a fully wrapped component so that you don't have to manage the anchoring and the popovers, and it has built-in semantics of what a select menu should be. This is only available right now to experiment with in Chrome Canary, and that's because there's still a lot of open questions about what select menu looks like and how we should build it into browsers. Like, what are the default styles? Do those default styles change on mobile devices for a better user experience? Well, that means that we now have to educate users about overrides. That seems like maybe that's not a good idea. What are the limitations of interactive content? A lot of the conversations happening in OpenUI are around accessibility. How do placeholders work for this content when you have things like, in these examples, we have images inside of the dropdown, like those flags and the colors? How do we set up placeholders? And what are all the parts? Like, what are the parts that we can change? What are the limitations? Can we have multi-select? What about combo box? What about list box? There's a lot of conversations that still need to happen, but hopefully we'll have this landing soon, and you can use it right now as a prototype in Canary. The last thing that I want to talk about briefly is scroll-driven animations. And they're so cool, and they're landing in Chrome 1.15. And there's a great site from Brahmas called scrolldrivenanimations.style, which shows you how to build these interactive experiences. So one really cool one is this cover flow, where this is a horizontal scroll-driven animation. Another one is this sort of header that then squishes at the top. And I really like this card stacking demo because this is the kind of marketing site we see all the time, where like you have things kind of move in that you can then interact with and scroll back up and go through. And you'll hear a lot more about this API and view transitions later when Brahms is talking tomorrow. So don't miss that because it's a really exciting one. And this is not even just one less dependency. It's also more performant to use these new scroll-driven animations APIs than scroll handlers with classic JavaScript. Because the scroll-driven animations API works off the main thread so that they don't jank up your site as you scroll, which is, when we compare that you'd have to do this with scroll handlers and JavaScript before, it's a lot slower. So again, stay tuned, more on this, but this is not just one less dependency, it's also more performant. And one more thing. Actually, just kidding, there's 20 more things because this is 2023, and I'm talking about CSS. There's so much. Oh, these are the things that I didn't even get to in this I've been talking forever. Why am I still up here? These are the things I didn't even get a chance to dig into, and they're not even everything that's landed in the last 2.5 years. So these are things like view transitions that you'll hear more about later, accent color landed, media query range syntax, like the way that we write media queries has changed, and container queries, subgrid, which is actively being worked on and will hopefully be landing very shortly, inert color fonts, there's new media features and overlay, there's the nth of micro syntax for better selection, and view transitions for MPAs too, not just SPAs. And we're also exploring state queries. We actually did get to show you because that was cool, and Brune is here. Select menu expansions, like what comes next, list box, combo box, multi-select. Exclusive accordions, which is getting implemented right now, so you can open one at a time. Animating from height 0 to auto, which is in exploration. Scroll snapping features, like scroll target. There's also, I didn't even talk about scroll end and scroll start. Oh, there's so many things. Fragmentation is getting a revamp and another look with it used to be regions, fragmentation's the current iteration of that. A contrast color has been in discussion at the working group, and how to provide a contrast color function, and then what other functions and mixins should look like. So I know that's a lot of things, but you might be wondering, how did we even get here? It feels like nothing happened for a while in CSS. We sort of had Houdini, and then all of this stuff is landing. So a big thing is in 2021, Rendering NG, which is a complete rewrite of the Chromium rendering engine, was mostly completed. And this was going on over 8 years under the hood while you were using Chrome. And this was a huge effort from the Chrome rendering team, which is the same team that works on CSS and style. And it composed of a lot of different pieces, including Composite After Paint, Layout NG, Blink NG, GPU acceleration everywhere, threaded scrolling, animations, and decode, Viz, threaded and accelerated canvas rendering, and video NG. And the core tenets of Rendering NG were to improve reliability, performance, and the extensibility of Chrome's rendering engine. So this architectural rewrite created a more scalable performance, improved caching, and enabled performance isolation, which also enabled increased GPU acceleration to have smoother animations. This was a big rendering engine change that also enabled things like content visibility and paint worklets off the main thread, and eventually container queries. And the deep core work that was done here was done because developer demand for those features. And browser vendors for years had been saying that there isn't a way to do this until there was. So Rendering NG also unblocked things like scroll-driven animations and hidden searchable DOM and view transitions, all those things that get us so excited today. But it's not just Chrome. Gecko and WebKit also have implemented many of the same architectural features. And having finished the baseline of this work, the style team's bandwidth opened up to be able to focus more on implementing these highly anticipated UI features that we see landing today and build them at a much faster rate. The second factor is getting more data, which has also helped us build a stronger relationship between the engineering team's roadmap and all of your needs, the community's needs. So surveys and data, I know it seems silly, but it actually helps us have data to show the team and show our team that people actually care about CSS. Because I feel like this is a community that tends to be underrepresented in the engineering world. So we need this data. We need people talking about this stuff to show that it's important. It's not just a couple people saying it. And this really helped to improve CSS and UI features. In 2019 and 2020, there was a big DevRel initiative at Google that centered around getting data on developer satisfaction. And I joke about this because I feel like it sounds like a Rorschach test, like how satisfied are you with the web platform? But it turns out that layout and styling were some of the top feature areas that caused compatibility issues and developer frustrations. And forms followed JavaScript and performance. So we were able to plant the small seed and get more attention focused on layout and styling. And this really drove more focus to this area. This is like a very grassroots initiative that we were able to have this data to help grow. And in 2020, we started getting more involved in the State of CSS survey to figure out exactly what developers are struggling with in these areas and what they need most. And now we've landed, or are really close to landing, almost all of the top feature requests from 2021, which we didn't have before, like container queries, a parent selector. We have has now that lets you do that, better browser support across the board with interop, nesting, scoping isn't a prototype, mix-ins aren't here yet, but that'll be next. Subgrid is not here yet, but is actively being worked on. And if you've been following web platform tests, a lot of them have been passing lately, and color functions. And we've done additional research, like a scroll survey that Adam did a few years ago, to disambiguate what it meant for developers to struggle with scroll, because we got that a lot too, which turned into a few different proposals for scroll APIs, like scroll start and scroll end. And another piece that came from DevSat explorations was the Compat 2021 effort, Interop 22, and Interop 2023 efforts that we're seeing today to fix bugs, incompatibilities, and just general cross-browser messiness. So Compat 2021 was really focused on these interoperability bugs and centered around UI features, which was a natural progression to keep that style theme going for Interop 2022. Taking it a step further, this edition included all of the browser vendors to identify bugs and inconsistencies, but also take a look at where we wanted to go and the core features that we should all bring to the platform. This is a big change in how browser vendors are working together and thinking. And that's been really awesome to see evolve into the second year in a row of having representatives from all major browser vendors and contractors that work on browsers involved. And it's grown not only into features, but also exploratory areas, like viewport behavior to solidify specs and answer open questions. And the list for 2023 was actually made open through an open call where you could open an issue and suggest it as a 2023 interop item. So from there, the involved groups reviewed the submissions and voted on what to include. So this became something that the community was able to get involved in, which is the third thing here, and that is all of you. Talking to the people here who are passionate about building for the web, a lot of you have shared ideas on where the web should go. A lot of you have opened bugs when you discover an edge case and make reduced test cases, which is so, so, so helpful. And we've been able to grow as a CSS and UI org at Google and more directly influence the prioritization of the browser engineering direction to be more focused on style and more focused on UI. And Apple has a CSS advocate now too. Jen Simmons is over there doing that hard work. And I think I mentioned earlier, I think Emilio is here, I'm not sure, but he's been an absolute hero, like building these features at Mozilla and championing CSS in the working group. And we've begun to see the culmination of all of these changes in the past few years. So this is really our time to shine in the web ecosystem. People are looking at how much is evolving in this space, in our space, with curiosity. And even now that we're getting all these great things that we've wanted for years, and even now with browser vendors banding together, finally, to fix bugs and launch features, and even though this is a golden era for web UI, it still feels like we're a little stuck sometimes. It's time for a CSS revolution. Oscar Wilde said in this very smart quote, "In this world, there are only two tragedies. One is getting what you want, and one is not getting what you want, and the other is getting it." So speaking of tragedies, there are so many conferences happening this year, which is amazing to see the web community, starting to really bounce back after a tough few years. I wonder what happened then. But there's still only one CSS conference, and you're here. You're at it. You're at the one CSS conference that's happening this year. There are over 50 JavaScript conferences that are happening all around the world. It's time for a CSS revolution. Because CSS looks very different now. If you're starting to code today, so much has changed, like we saw yesterday at the pre-event. We have cascade layers to actually control our place in the cascade order. If you're new to this, you're like, what is that? What is that layer? We have new color spaces and syntax for colors. Container queries that actually have this embedded logic. Media query range syntax, so even our media queries look different. We have nesting, which is soon coming to all three browser engines. And you can contain all of your logic within your components. We even write transforms differently. So we need to get the word out about this. It's really important to do that. And this wouldn't be a tech conference in 2023 without AI. The website did say it was CSS AI Conf for a few days, so let's get AI in the mix. So I opened up an AI tool and I wrote, write me a job listing for a front-end developer who will be focused on CSS. And it starts getting back to me with job title, location, job type, salary range. OK, this all makes sense. Job description, cool. It's all well and good. We've got a role here for a CSS specialist, a CSS aficionado is what it calls it, if you will. So let's see what the requirements are for this role. Is anyone going to guess it? CSS3. Yes, that's like a keyword that we just can't seem to get away from. Where CSS evolution apparently ended, because all the courses are about CSS3. And what people still learn because resumes are asking for it, or they think that they need to learn that. It's right there in this education site. Learn the most in-demand skills, CSS3. And not to call out anyone here or anything, Luki, but can anyone spot it? Can you spot it? It's right there. You can't get away from it. Even when you're doing like a Canvas demo, that's completely different and very cool. You just can't get away from CSS3. And one of the replies here is from Tony, and he said, I found myself forced to use it for videos because everyone else does, and it has this kind of brand recognition. So I understand this, but it keeps us stuck in the past because CSS3 is a terrible description for where we are today. We are stuck, and it's time for a CSS revolution. So if you're interested in working on this, there is a small community group who's trying to redefine CSS and help get us unstuck. It's brand new, it's just started, and the idea is to help people, employers, students, everyone understand that we can move beyond CSS3 and move into a more modern recognition of what CSS is today. And PPK, who organizes this conference, is a part of it. There's a few folks here who are part of it. So if you're interested in getting involved, come talk to one of us, PPK, Adam, me. You can join the community group. You don't have to be an invited expert or be a part of the CSS working group to do this. Community groups are open to everyone with a W3C account. And you can follow along, because soon we'll have more studies to kind of help push this and figure out a solution. But this is where you come in for the CSS revolution, to join the CSS revolution, to be a part of the change. This is your time to be a part of the evolution of the web platform. And this is a time where browser vendors are looking to you and asking you for feedback. Like that's really cool. This is a time to participate in open calls. Interop 2024 submissions will probably open again in a few months, so you can open issues on the features that you'd like to see on the Interop GitHub page. And specifically, these are features that have specs already for Interop. Comment on issues. You can keep up with the CSS working group and the OpenUI community group on GitHub. There are open GitHub communities where you can read all the issues, you can comment on issues, talk about your use cases, share test examples. Even a thumbs up helps, because it shows us that there's interest in a feature, even if you don't know how to get started with the conversation. And to do the surveys. We look at the surveys for feedback. It seems silly to send this out and be like, fill this out, but it actually does help to get things prioritized and help understand if you're using things and if you like them. And to join community groups, again, I mentioned that you don't have to be an invited expert or work at a company that is a part of the working group to join community groups. So these are things like OpenUI and CSS Next, the one that's trying to redefine what CSS is for the future. These are all virtual, too. So this is something that you can take part of at home. And it's so important to spread the word about all these great changes in CSS. We need more CSS and UI events. And this is a perfect place to get started. In 2013, I attended the SassConf in New York. And I decided right then and there, this is so cool. I'm with all these people that care about Sass. I want to have this back where I live. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. So I met somebody at the conference who I ended up starting the Sassy DC meetup with. And that was an opportunity to build community where we were. So this is the perfect opportunity to meet people that are like-minded from where you are, from living virtual events, and start things, start organizing, start making space and opportunities for people. I miss the days of CSS Confs. I'm very grateful to have this event here. And even if there aren't any CSS events, you should be speaking about these things. Even at JavaScript events, that's even better, because those are people who aren't already following. Speak at meetups and events. Explore the new stuff. So try things out and write about them. Write about your experiences. Share what you're learning. Share what you're doing. Share it with your community. Tell us if it's broken. This is so important to see, folks actually using things. And talk about these things if you're trying out the new stuff. You can advocate internally. You can be the person on your team who's educating others, trying new things, exploring modern tooling. And talk to CSS working group members. Talk to people who work on the web platform, at browser vendors. We've got folks here from Microsoft, from Mozilla, from Google. And this is the event that you have a rare opportunity to actually talk to the engineers who are implementing these things behind the hood. And we also have the DevTools team here who's exploring how to improve UI tooling for you all. We've got your back. It's a cool opportunity to be here. And as a bonus, 2024 planning is going to be starting soon for the web platform, what to build, finishing up this year into next year. So please come find Bramis and Adam and me and come to our help desk and come talk to us. These are all the people from Chrome who are here, the people who've built container queries and are working on style and state queries, view transitions, scope, and all the tooling features too. So we have this help desk. Come meet with us. Here's a schedule. I know I'm running kind of long, but come talk to us. Here's day 2. When I spoke on the stage 7 years ago, I was just doing this for funsies. I was playing with numbers and making nice colors appear. I had no idea that I would get to work on the platform itself and to have CSS and UI become a full-time job. And we didn't have these DevRel teams. We didn't have Introp. We didn't have Baseline. We didn't have people looking out for you and your needs and your community like we do now. So we need that. We deserve that because CSS is awesome. It makes sense to separate logic from styling, give users more control through CSS, to improve the architecture and web platform capabilities. It makes sense to move interactions off the main thread while making it easier to build dynamic interfaces. There's so much moving in this space, and the undercurrents are shifting how we build websites today, which is why I'm so lucky to know many of you who are change makers in this space and who educate others, whether it's on stage like this, or whether it's writing articles, or whether it's bringing this back to your team and causing change from the inside out. So I'm very grateful to kick off this edition of CSS Day at a time when so much is changing. This is going to be an amazing event this year. Thank you so much.
CSS,
hey,
CSS,
Adam.
CSS, CSS. That was awesome.
Thank
you crushed
you.
it. There are a lot of questions in here. I'm looking forward to getting to them.
Cool. Also, if you want to follow along with things that are changing on the web, web.dev and developer.chrome.com are good resources. So you could follow along with stuff, things and stuff.
Stuff and things.
Yes.
Oh, there's so much. All right. Well, thank you all for submitting your questions. You did very well. I'm going to try to get through as much of these as I can and avoid the really hard ones. Okay, no, just kidding. No, those are going to be the first ones I pick. Just kidding. We have one here from Tom. It says, will SVB, so that's small viewport block or small viewport height, fix the VW plus scroll bar issue?
That'd be a good question for Brahmas, so I'm going to defer. He says no.
Deflection.
Answer is no.
I think the answer is no also. I think you have to stick to percentages.
Yeah.
But maybe one day we'll know what the scroll bar size is. All right, we got one here.
Yeah,
It says,
that's annoying.
Yeah, that is annoying. What's your take on the effect of all these recent CSS developments on the state of front-end frameworks like Svelte, React, Astro, etc.?
That's a great question. So I think that a lot of these features, especially the architectural ones, it's a good opportunity to update the frameworks, to use them, leverage the browser, and have a smaller JavaScript load. So we can use things like scope comes from Svelte asking for it. Like that's something that is an idea that's floating around. Miriam, who's working here, is working on that spec. And Svelte is one of the people who, Rich Harris, I want that. That would be great. So the more people who are asking for it, the better. With things like layers, I think that could be implemented in Astro. That could be implemented in a lot of these frameworks. So I think that they work really nicely together, especially because a lot of these new features are component-focused, which is what the frameworks are as well.
Very, very nice. Is at starting style going to be limited to popovers?
No, it is not. You can use starting style on anything. So I've built demos where I'm just animating elements in and out of like a to-do list, of just with a checkbox. And you can use starting style on any elements, not just for popovers. So you can animate things that are display none to display, or just like a pre-style. But it would be weird to use it for things that aren't display none.
Animating display none.
Yeah,
How fun.
starting style lets the browser look up the CSS cascade and know what styles it needs to apply from. Because if something's displayed none on the page, it doesn't know what styles it has. So you have to have a new primitive starting style to look up the tree. So anyway, the answer is yes. I ramble.
I thought you did very well. I don't know. So there's this. Who's this Jeremy Keith person? I know they asked a question. It feels like one area where we still need to reach for JavaScript is changing state. What's happening with CSS toggles?
CSS toggles is currently, the problem it was trying to solve is very big. So in the way that it was shown in the explainer that you're probably referencing, it probably will not be landing in that state, but it's getting broken out into some of the smaller use cases and needs for toggles to have a better ability to actually ship and land. So with toggles, state management in CSS is probably not going to look the way it did. It'll probably be more focused on individual components, so things like tabs and the needs for tabs, for accordions, needs for accordions, for menus as that comes up. That's sort of been the direction because it's very, very hard to make something so general be accessible. So that's the key issue there.
Nice. It was fun to prototype there for a second. Toggles, there was so much activity. And then we were like, wow, this is a really hard problem space.
Yeah, and another one to talk to Miriam about if you see her floating around, too. She's starting the day off tomorrow, too.
Awesome. Are all text balance properties limited to 4 lines?
I believe that, well, yes, because it's very heavy to compute the actual text balance. You have to like look at the entire line of text. So the engineering team made a decision that, okay, we're going to use this for headings. It's headline balancing. That's what it's called. And so the limit was 4 lines of text. I don't know if that will be the limit for pretty, because there might be some optimizations that are made, but that one's still pretty early on in that space. I recently asked about it, and I was told unclear. So I guess stay tuned. We'll find out.
I'd like to see pretty work on paragraphs.
I would too, because I think that in theory you should be able to just isolate the last 2 lines or even last 3 lines to make style adjustments. So I'm hopeful for that, but again, it's exploratory currently.
Exploratory, yeah. They 4 feels kind of arbitrary too, but from what I heard, it was just like this was the average where it was fine.
Actually, if you have examples of where you want to use text drop balance from more than 4 lines of text, please let us know. Because we did like an open call, we asked, and there wasn't any real objection, so that's a decision that was made. But please show us and let us know.
Nice. Awesome. Let's see, we've got, from Paul, it's easy to think that we have better browser compatibility, but we now only have 3 rendering engines. Is improved compatibility worth the price of having less browser diversity?
What do you think? We do have 3 browser rendering engines, which is better than 1, so that's good. I think as a developer, I really care about interoperability. So my goal is making sure it works across all the platforms that developers are building for, that users are using sites on. I definitely want more browser diversity. Like I want browser diversity across the board, which is why I hope that we continue to have 3, at least. But yeah, this is a hard one to answer because it's sort of, you're weighing, some issues. The cool thing about Chromium, though, is that it's enabled browsers to be built on top of it, like Arc and Brave, that add new browser features. So you get new user features, but the browser doesn't have to worry about re-implementing a rendering engine. That's a really hard problem to solve, and they can focus on additional features. So I don't know. I'm not going to say it's better, but I think that we are reaping the benefits of having the current state be what it is.
Definitely. Just like having a variety of frameworks to choose from creates competition. They borrow goodness from each other. The browser engines are doing the same thing. The browser is still a big pile of code, just like your app is, and people write it. This is we need the competition. It keeps everything hot and ready, just like pizza.
Yeah, and critically, it's not like the browser, Google's not going off in a corner and deciding, here's what we want. We're, at the working group, everything that's built into the browser goes through a spec process, which has representatives across all browser engines and invited experts, community members, and it comes from hearing about your needs. So it's not like, pushing forward with an agenda to land a single API. It's really a community-focused effort in the open web for browser features.
It's so much better with the diversity. Everyone knows it.
Yes.
It would not be better if it was run by some little small crew of folks.
That would be weird.
Yep, it would be weird. All right, we have one more question for you, which is what states are planned for state queries besides sticky?
Well, we're currently looking for feedback about the states that you think would be valuable. There's a few that have been floated. Sticky is obviously one that's I showed and is very useful, and one that Adam's been like, I need sticky for a long time.
I want to know when it's stuck.
I need sticky. Other ones is overflowing. That's useful. One that I really want is what position it's in for position sets, like the position fallback, so that you can apply styles. Like if you have an arrow icon for a popover tooltip, you could swap that style. For that radial menu, I'd be able to open it downwards based on the state that it's in. So right now, it's sort of an open call. Other ideas have been is it in the viewport? Is it visible? Things like that. So that's a good one to ideate on and mull on and think about, and think about what you're building and what you need states for.
Yeah, what state does the browser have that you don't have access to? It's like opaque state. You can't see it. Think of things that the browser knows internally that you don't get to know, and that's what we want to expose. Awesome. We got one more question here from the live stream. It says, what does Una think will be the most impactful feature over the next year or so if you had to pick just one? Oh,
that's hard. Impact to users, I think that all the container work, as a set, is very impactful. One that I think is going to be really impactful for developers is app property. That's still not landed in all 3 browsers, but that's one that really makes CSS a more semantic typed language that elevates it even to the next level. I should have added that to my things I didn't talk about slide, because Safari added support for it. That's one that I really want to see. land. But there's a lot. Has is really powerful. It also has rendering issues if you're using it on like the root of your file, like the HTML with a large DOM tree. So try to scope that as tightly as you can. Talk to Rune about that also.
Or Patrick, I bet that'll show up in the talk.
Oh yeah.
Or it will now because I requested it. Where are you at? I don't know. No eye contact. Dang it, can't
But
confirm.
it's a powerful feature too. God, there's so many. I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any more questions that you have for Yuna, find her upstairs. And we are going to be back here at 10:55. Go grab some tea, some coffee. Make sure you don't bring glass downstairs, and we'll see you around.